If you are hearing this in two parts, then we strongly encourage you to make sure that you're listening to part one before diving into part two, which will be coming out a couple days later, just so that you have the full context for the conversation. On the other hand, you can always go to From the Periphery's Patreon site, where you can actually hear the full 2 hour and 15-minute conversation in one go. And that is available for free, though if you happen to have the resources, it would be wonderful to support the collective and all the incredible work that they are doing. So thank you so much for listening. I'm going to do a little bit of an overview of some of the most recent developments that have been happening in the US repression-wise. And then we're going to switch over to how that's been looking across the border in Mexico as far as the impacts. In general, I think there's been a lot of global media coverage in terms of the disturbing developments in the US under Trump in the last couple months. Obviously, generally speaking, the US gets a disproportionate amount of attention globally as it causes a disproportionate amount of damage. But as we have listeners from all over, just to do a quick update on some of what we've seen here. So these attacks on immigrant communities in the US and obviously globally are nothing new, nor are they particularly partisan. So, as many people know, Obama ended up deporting more people than any president prior to him. And likewise, Biden topped Trump's numbers from before that in his first term. So, while clearly the rhetoric and threats under the current Trump administration, along with sort of what we're seeing more visibly in terms of actual deportation activity, is terrorizing communities, it is also really important to see the nonpartisan long-term trends that have been gravely impacting people's lives here for a very long time. In fact, Bernie Sanders even said the other day that the one area that he agrees with Trump is in his focus on stifling immigration. So, as far as I'm concerned, none of them are getting anything right. So some specific developments that we've had lately in terms of legal changes and in terms of the repression activities. So Trump had a very public collaboration that was agreed upon with El Salvador's President Bukele, where Bukele agreed to house migrants in private Salvadoran prisons for money. A few weeks ago, 238 Venezuelans were sent there. And, this seems to overtly fit the definition of what gets called human trafficking, that basically Bukele was agreeing to receive migrants from the US and house them indefinitely in very dire conditions in private Salvadoran prisons so that he could make money. Similarly, sort of along that route, we've seen people being sent to the concentration camp at Guantanamo Bay that was used for 20 years for folks related to the quotes war on terror, and is now being used to house migrants who are being shipped out of the US to Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. Due to its remote location, there is very little access for lawyers or any kind of support once people are sent there. We're also seeing the reestablishment of family detention, where entire families are being incarcerated, and we're essentially seeing families disappear once that gets enacted. One of the most recent things that is really ominous is a potential collaboration between the Internal Revenue Service, which is the tax collecting agency in the United States. For decades, people who are undocumented have been strongly encouraged to be paying taxes. So people are essentially contributing to public funds and receiving no benefits in return. But that has been sold to people as a pathway to help with sort of legalizing their status eventually, if that should ever happen, that they'll be positioned in a much better place if they've been paying taxes for a certain number of years. So paying taxes obviously involves revealing your address, revealing all kinds of personal information. So that information has been collected by the IRS, but never until the current time has it been shared publicly, or rather with other agencies. So right now, the agreement that's been being worked out is that ICE, which is Immigration and Customs Enforcement, will have direct access to all of the Internal Revenue Service's information. This sets a horrifying precedent because it essentially reveals everybody's locations, everybody's personal details and information in a way that has never previously taken place. What we're hearing is that they're very close to solidifying that agreement. And obviously, for anyone who's been following what Elon Musk is up to, getting hold of all kinds of information through Social Security and other places has also been, changing hands. Finally, we've been seeing the revocation of visas and green cards, followed by ICE detention and deportation to criminalize students who've been protesting Israelis' genocide in Gaza. To date, there's been at least 7 somewhat high-profile students and scholars of color from various countries who've had their visas revoked and are being detained. This is a direct attempt at criminalizing particularly people of color who are students in this country who are raising their voices against the genocide. And so again, the precedents around this are first in terms of revoking of people's legal immigration status. I will say that personally in the Bay Area, it feels like while we've been slightly less impacted by the visibility of ICE in our communities, we are seeing that presence more and more, but it has been more obvious in other parts of the country. But one place that we've been seeing it flare up is directly at immigration courts. So we have immigration courts in San Francisco and Concord that are both nearby here, where people are showing up for their standard immigration hearings and are subsequently not granted status approval that they, previously would be, and then are unexpectedly and immediately arrested and deported, arriving back in their home countries as soon as the following day. And again, this can include entire families who are suddenly disappeared without any notice. Some folks that I don't know personally, but am in community with, had that experience where a mother, a partner, and a child showed up for their hearing and, with surprise even to their attorney, were not granted status and were arrested and were in Guatemala the next day. So things are shifting, changing very quickly. This is Future Michelle chiming back in about a month later on May the 8th for an update since I had last recorded the information about the situation in the United States. I think the first thing to note is just the speed at which a lot of the repression towards immigrant communities is escalating, and really just the complete dismantling of so many structures in the United States is an intended part of fascism's encroachment on life here. I'm just going to name a couple of the most recent egregious measures that have been taken because I think it's probably impossible to encapsulate all of them. I think just comparing what I had recorded a month ago to some of these updates gives a sense of where things are at. Maybe the first thing to note is that while there are a lot of horrible measures being declared by the Trump administration, a lot of them are tied up in court. So as much as ICE are actually following through on a lot of these threats, they are not necessarily legal, and they are still being contested with some victories in holding them off. So that is important to note. For instance, the Alien Enemies Act, which is an incredibly obscure 18th century War Powers Act that had been used to deport Venezuelans to El Salvador that I mentioned in the last announcement, it's been rejected that they can use that. It's still already happened, and people are still unable to bring the people who have been taken out of the country back, but it is not deemed legal how it happened. And, that's still being contested. Likewise, further plans that Trump had to revoke the TPS, which is temporary protective status, that granted 2 years of safety to Haitians, Cubans, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans in the United States, has also been blocked by the courts. It's not clear how that's going to play out. One of the biggest things that has happened was an announcement that they were going to reinstate the CBP-1 app, which was the Customs and Border Patrol application that had been used to basically revamp some of the asylum process, and it was complete chaos. Basically, it resulted now in them reopening the app with the announcement that 900,000 people would need to self-deport and register that they would do so on the app. So recently, as in a couple of days ago, they announced that there would be $1,000 stipend and travel assistance to any of those people who chose to self-deport. I've been working with a student who received that email that went out to so many hundreds of thousands of people, and the language on it is horrifying, and it basically just shows up in your inbox saying that your time in the US is up, and completely created panic in many communities. That is sort of still unclear as to how that's going to play out. Likewise, in my last update, I had said that there were 7, I believe, student visas that had been revoked. At this point, that number has drastically climbed to the low estimate being 1,500, up to certain estimates of around 5,000 student visas related to protests against Israel's genocide against Palestinians in Gaza, where people who were here on student visas have had those visas taken away as a result. And again, this is totally unprecedented. And a number of those folks have been arrested and sent to immigration detention centers. We have seen in the last couple of days a judge blocking intended administration flights to send a number of Asian migrants to Libya and Rwanda. As we know, Libya in particular's record around migrant detention and torture is horrifying, and this is a first that the country would be sending people abroad in that way, just like what's happening with Latino immigrants being sent to El Salvador. So far, a judge has blocked those flights, but it's not clear what's going to happen. Another high-profile case related to the deportations to El Salvador that happened a couple months ago is Kilmore Abrego Garcia, who was deported from Maryland and had very clear legal status and protections here, and was, quotes, mistakenly deported, but they have refused to bring him back. In the last couple of days, there was a DACA recipient who had received permission to leave, who was deported upon his return. So we're just seeing explosions undermining people's rights in every direction. And I think it would be fairly impossible to encapsulate all of the updates, but I just wanted to highlight how much has changed in the last month and how much worse things have gotten. I'd love to turn it over now to Andrea or Diana or Viviane to talk a little bit about how this is looking on the other side of the border.
For example, from Tijuana, I think that the first month it's super weird. Like, I don't know, I just have a lot of feelings for that situation. I write in my notes, like, since the interaction between President of Mexico and the President of the United States, um, there has been strong crackdown on people coming on the border. Like the president for Mexico, I don't know what talking with the Trump, but um, in the airports and the terminal of the buses, there have a lot of, like, the name is Guardia Nacional. That I don't know how can you explain in English. Maybe Carlos Gascama can help me. How can describe these persons in Mexico from other people in the world?
So the Guardia Nacional or the National Guard is a new institution that was made in Mexico by previous government, by Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador government. So it's a new kind of institution in between the police and the army. Um, but like its members come from mostly the army. So at the end of the day, it's the army, just with a different name, just with on certain list of activities that they can handle, because sometimes they are given police enforcement activities. They have been given construction activities for some of the projects from the president, or the airport, for the train, for things like that. And then one of the most important features that I think is the one that Diana means is they were given the authority on migration matters. So when Trump started this next of set of negotiations about migration with Mexico, something that we say is that Trump kept saying that Mexico was going to pay for the wall. So in the end, there might not be a new physical wall in the border between Mexico and the United States, but there's a new wall in the southern border of Mexico and Guatemala, and that is the Guardia Nacional.
This is Andrea speaking. Here in the city of Tijuana, the violence in the city has a long history. More recently, we have seen the effects of this Trump administration and the decisions you just mentioned, such as the appearance of the new National Guard that only solidifies the militarized border here on the Mexican side. And for a more clear example of my own experience, and from the daily struggle, that is the constant deprivation of people's liberty while moving within the city, especially those without government documentation within this hotspot in the city where people are always on the move. Here, people who fit a certain racialized profile are illegally stopped and robbed by the police without any consequences to the violators. And now, with the added militarization of the borderland in the last few months, done by the Mexican government, military and Mexican National Guards persecute and jail migrants in wrongly called shelters where they are literally locked in cells. While doing all this, the state claims a humane migration policy, even calling it a new humanitarian Mexicanism, but it is not less than a disguised armed anti-migration force. Daily, we see cases of people being picked up by police-marked vehicles made for kidnapping people by the dozens, poor people, including migrants and deportees, in the name of this fake fairy tale called the fight against narcos. Most of the time, they're taken in for hours, and sometimes they're taken and never to be seen again. And that is the violence that's lived on the streets here in the city on a micro scale, you could say it. On a bigger side, on a bigger scale, on a bigger frame, the violence of the oppressions of the military national guards can manifest in them being physically aggressive to the migrant community, to migrants and poor people, crossing physically, trying to physically cross the border. Their violence it stems to a point of killing without any consequences, not even outcry from the public. Last year, this report from Punto Norte shows the National Guard killing and burning the bodies of young migrants trying to jump over the wall. This shows that the intentions of the state are not only to harass the people, but to stop the migration by any means, even lethal force. once again going against the pro-humanitarian migration campaign held by the Mexican state that locates itself or tries to locate itself away from our neighbors up north, but it is not. It has actually become an extension of that very same American anti-immigrant strategy that the Mexican government is using for its economic and political benefits when dealing with the U.S. foreign policies. Kind of them playing a chessboard game where the lives of humans, migrants, LGBT people, queer people, and poor people are the pieces of the game to be lost, to be win. That would be a direct manifestation of how is that the militarization and the actions of the police here right next to the physical border manifests.
La sociedad está lista, pero todavía las instituciones no responden. En mi experiencia como migrante y trabajadora comunitaria, puede decir que el pueblo mexicano ya está listo para convivir con la comunidad haitiana. Con el tiempo se han generado como relaciones de amistad, lazos íntimos, intercambios culturales genuinos. Más que racismo, lo que he percibido yo en Tijuana o en Chiapas, donde lleve como 2 meses, es clasismo. En México, el color de piel pasa a segundo plano cuando una persona tiene cierto estatus, recursos o recursos. No es el color, es la condición social lo que sigue marcando muchas barreras. Si tienes dinero, eres negro, no pasó nada. Sin embargo, esta apertura social contrasta con la respuesta institucional que sigue siendo deficiente. Como frente a los flujos, como desde ya pasó 2 grandes oleadas en 2016-2021, como ya había crisis humanitaria, pero las instituciones mexicanas no están a la altura de la situación.
Mexican people and Mexican society are ready to interact with Haitian people, but institutions are the ones that are not acting accordingly yet. So, in my experience as a migrant and as a community worker, I can say, I can repeat this, that the Mexican people are ready to live along Haitian community. With time, relations of friendship, more intimate relations, and intercultural exchange have developed. More than racism, what I have perceived in a lot of cases is classism. In Mexico, the color of the skin goes to a second degree after the status or resources that a person has. So I would say that it is not color, it is social condition that is still marks these barriers. Nonetheless, this social aperture, it contrasts with institutional response, which is still deficient, especially for the migratory fluxes from Haiti.
Voy a tomar 2 ejemplos. Uno con la INM. La INM, que es el Instituto Nacional de Migración, que nunca ha contado con un personal capacitado para traducir del criollo haitiano al español o viceversa, lo que ha dificultado enormemente el acceso a derechos y procedimientos legales. A pesar de esta falta de infraestructura básica, el propio INM ha documentado la recepción de al menos 16.919 personas haitianas entre 2020 y 2021, siendo Chiapas el estado con mayor número de trámites migratorios registrados, por supuesto. Pero no hay una desfase entre la solidaridad social y la indiferencia institucional.
Giving two examples. The first one is about the National Institute for Migrations that has never hired anyone to properly translate from Haitian Creole to Spanish, which has caused enormous difficulties to get the access or the procedures, the legal procedures for a lot of people. And even though this clear lack of infrastructure is present, the Institute for National Migration has received at least 16,919 Haitian people between 2020 and 2021, being Chiapas the state with the most number of migratory processes being held on. And this big difference between social solidarity and then institutional indifference shows that um, there's a will to integrate exist on the base of society, but the state hasn't modified or adopted neither either their policies nor their bureaucratic system to the reality of an Afro-descendant, plurilingual, and socially excluded population.
El segundo ejemplo es el perfilamiento racial. Como yo ya tengo 4 años viviendo aquí en Tijuana, a cada vez me apuente en el aeropuerto, yo tengo que pasar una hora a decir por qué viaje, qué estoy haciendo en Tijuana, por qué tengo esa residencia permanente, mientras otras personas que traen cosas ilícitas, que tienen una piel blanca, o personas como indocumentados, como ellos dijeron, así que pueden pasar un maratón con la piel blanca, pero si yo normalmente normal, directo, documentado y todo eso, vacando a mis cosas, pero tengo que decir por qué. Porque con la piel ya me identifiqué y con el acento ya saben si soy americano o haitiano.
Another big part, as a second example, is the racial profiling. So, for example, in my case, my personal case, having lived in Mexico for 4 years and having this temporary residence permit, whenever I'm in an airport arriving to Mexico, I'm being asked many questions on what am I doing in Mexico? Why do I have this residence permit? And I'm always interviewed in these aspects. And I see that in other situations, from people with a white skin color, they are not asked, even though they might have some illicit things going on, either being on substances or paper issues. But in my case, as soon as they identify me because of my skin color, they begin questioning everything. And just when they hear my accent, they know that I'm not from an American citizen. So that's why I see that sometimes people with a lighter skin tone don't get aborted that much in the airports. But in my case, even though I have all the documents and all the proofs, I still need to give a long explanation of what am I doing here.
This is Michelle. Thank you so much, everyone, for outlining the repression that's happening. I think we can see a lot of global trends. And now we're going to shift gears to something a little more inspiring, which is the ways that people have been autonomously trying to fight back against this. As we said earlier, a lot of us are doing so sometimes in collaboration with nonprofits or NGOs when those resources are necessary. But sometimes that's also happening in smaller collectives in forms of solidarity and mutual aid. There's a lot that we're sort of scuffling to figure out in the midst of these changing times and trying to figure out, hopefully, by building these international relationships, how we can make some of our movements stronger in the face of the repression. So, Viviane, do you want to chime in a little bit on what you've seen and experienced?
Mi papel como organizadora comunitaria frente a las decisiones del Estado, que sea México o de los Estados Unidos. Así que desde diciembre de 2021, cuando comencé como voluntaria a Tijuana, mi papel fue como orientado, acompañado y defendido a miembros de la comunidad migrante haitiana y francófona, Áfricas. Hoy, como organizadora comunitaria, mi trabajo consiste en implementar estrategias de solidaridad, ser el puente entre la comunidad y las instituciones. A continuación, describo algunas de las acciones que he desempeñado en momentos claves. Durante el título 42, exención 42, bajo el gobierno de Trump, identifiqué a personas en situación de vulnerabilidad, enfermos, personas con discapacidad, mujeres embarazadas para brindarles atención humanitaria y salud, también las que inscribía en listas de espera para facilitar sus cruces.
My role as a community or organizer in front of all the decisions from the state, might it be Mexico or the United States, Well, since December 2021, I started as a volunteer in Tijuana. And since then, I have provided orientation and defended members of the Haitian and Francophone community. Today, I'm no longer a volunteer but an organizer in this community work, and my work consists on implementing strategies of solidarity and being a bridge in between a community and institutions. So, to continue, I'll describe some of the actions that I have made in critical moments marked by migratory politics in Mexico and the United States. So, for starters, the exemption 42 under Trump's government. There, I identified all the persons in vulnerability situation. May it be a sick person or persons that were sick with different capacities, pregnant women, and I was providing humanitarian and health aid. Also, I was enrolling them into this waiting list to make their crossing process easier.
En el tema como educación sobre derechos, y asegure la traducción del contenido de talleres sobre derechos y deberes en criollo en criol Haitian, promoviendo el acceso en la información, lo que es Know Your Rights, Kiwayo. Transición posterior al fin del título 42. Actúe como cuando termine el título 42, actúe como mediadora entre la comunidad haitiana y diversas instituciones promoviendo su inclusión social y laboral a través de talleres, orientación comunitaria, lo que estoy haciendo en este momento porque la frontera está cerrada. Y cuando llegue la aplicación CBP One, brinde información, orientación sobre el uso de la app, no solo en Tijuana, sino también en Ciudad México, lugar donde podrían interceptar una cita, en coordinación con abogados de la organización.
Regarding education, I was part of the Know Your Rights program. So I secured translation of all the contents from the workshops of Know Your Rights about rights and duties, and translated to Haitian Creole, providing thus a real access to the information. Later on the transition after the exemption 42, I acted as a mediator between Haitian community and diverse institutions, promoting social inclusion, social and laboral inclusion through different workshops and community orientation. Then, when the CVP1 application arrived, I provided information and orientation about how to use this app, not only in Tijuana, but in Mexico City as well, which was another place where you could get your appointments for this app. And to do this, it was in coordination with different attorneys from the organization.
Y cuando hay fallos, como cuando llegue la aplicación CBP One, había fallas en todas, problemas con la piel negra, debe ser como a las 2 de la mañana para tomar foto y todo esto. Y todo esto yo estuve como recopilar evidencias de los problemas técnicos, su mal funcionamiento y todo esto, pero fueron esas pruebas que fueron clave para demandas legales que lograron modificaciones en el sistema. Y también coordine y facilite implementación de campañas de salud en punto donde se encontraba la comunidad haitiana, colaborando en la preparación y en la traducción.
So when the CVP1 app arrived, it came with a lot of malfunctions on it. So I dedicated myself to gather evidence on all the technical problems that the app was going through, especially that it didn't work properly on darker skins, and that sometimes you needed to take the pictures and it would only work at 2 a.m. in the morning or something like that. So these different evidence and proofs that I was gathering were key elements in the following legal actions and suits that happened against this app that ended up in modifications being made to the system. Regarding campaigns on public health, I coordinated and mediated implementation on these health campaigns in strategic points where Haitian community was concentrated, collaborating always in the preparation of these campaigns and the translation for the events.
Y también cada mes o cada 15 días participe en distribución de apoyo de ayuda económica y en especie a albergues que acogen a personas haitianas en situación de vulnerabilidad. Cuando termine la suspensión de CBP1, recopile pruebas de todas las citas canceladas por la aplicación para respaldar acciones legales y denuncias públicas. Y también ante situación de violencia, abuso institucional, asume el papel de vocera ante medios y como una mediación institucional para la inclusión social, crear puente entre la comunidad. Actualmente estoy con la institución de la dirección migrante para ver cómo podría hacer una posible inclusión social y laboral para los haitianos.
So, in the humanitarian aid, every 15 days I participated in the distribution of economical aid to different shelters that hosted Haitian people that were in vulnerable situations. After the CVP1 app was suspended, I dedicated to gather evidence of every appointment that was canceled by the app. So this could back all the public and legal complaints that were made against this app. On violations to human rights or institutional abuse, I always take the role as a speaker on media or with reporters, different organizations, to always try to communicate and speak up about what's happening against authorities, or even promoting alliances with other organizations. So right now, I'm still working with the organization as an advocate of human rights and the Haitian community in general.
Actualmente, como alguien podría, el Estado podría apoyarnos como en la inestabilidad institucional. Lo que ha como los problemas que he encontrado, las asociaciones que quieren apoyar a todas las comunidades, está en la inestabilidad institucional. Siempre hay cambios y los constantes cambios en los directivos de instituciones claves como las oficinas de atención al migrante, la INM, el DIF, dificultan la continuidad de los acuerdos. Cada nuevo funcionario implica empezar desde cero, volver a explicar, generar confianza y reestructurar estrategias. La burocracia excesiva. Los procesos administrativos suelen ser lentos, complejos y poco accesibles. Esta burocracia actúa como una barrera que impide llevar a cabo acciones urgentes o implementar programas con agilidad, especialmente en contexto de crisis.
Some limitations that I have encountered through my work and different challenges that I have faced have to do with instability on the institutions. Uh, the constant changes of the directives on key institutions such as the Institute of National Migration or the Integral Development of Family have challenged the continuity of the previous agreements. Every new functionary needs to start from zero, and I need to go back again and explain and generate trust and restructure the previous agreements. So it is really difficult to have continuity on the program, on the process. Also, there's excessive bureaucracy on the institutions. The administrative processes tend to be slow, complex, and really inaccessible sometimes. This bureaucracy acts as a barrier that prevents us from taking urgent action. or implementing programs with agility, especially in crisis context.
Y actualmente lo que como que podría hacer, como estoy tratando de llegar a las personas como de intereses de México, ya dejo el Estado porque ya me cansé, pero necesito actualmente un reconocimiento real de la mano de obra haitiana y su valor social. La comunidad haitiana ha demostrado ser una fuerza laboral resiliente, dispuesta a integrarse y aportar. Sin embargo, su mano de obra es a menudo sobreestimada en el discurso público como si fueran muy trabajadores, pero poco valorada en términos de derechos laborales, salarios justos, estabilidad o reconocimiento. Hay una contradicción entre el uso práctico que se hace del esfuerzo haitiano y el poco interés institucional en generar condiciones dignas para que estas personas puedan desarrollarse plenamente. Urge pasar de una lógica de explotación silenciosa a una inclusión económica con justicia, con contratos formales, acceso a la seguridad nacional, seguridad social, oportunidades de emprendimiento y movilidad profesional. No se trata solo de integrarlos como mano de obra barata, sino como ciudadanos con proyecto de vida.
A key element that I feel that needs to be strength, it needs to gain a strength, is the attention and inclusion of Haitian community in Mexico regarding the to recognize the recognition of the Haitian work in and its value on Mexican society. The Haitian community has demonstrated to be a resilient laboral force, always willing to integrate and to apport. Nonetheless, the the handwork of the Haitian community is sometimes overestimated in the public discourse as if they were really hard workers. Uh, but at the same time, it is really infravalorated in terms of work rights and a just salary, or even stability or and recognition in enterprises. There is a contradiction on the practical use that is talked about the Haitian efforts and low interest in the institutions to generate fair conditions, from one of silent exploitation to one of just economical inclusion and fair treatment, with formal contracts, with access to social security, with opportunities for entrepreneurship and professional mobility. It's not just about integrating them as cheap workers, but as citizens with a proper project of life.
Thank you so much, Viviane. We're going to shift gears a little bit to look at some of the types of solidarity that have been happening in the healthcare sphere. In particular, as was brought up earlier, something that we don't discuss enough is often the impact of stress and anxiety on people who are dealing with these situations of migration. Deanna, as a psychologist, do you want to chime in on some of the work that you've been doing?
Yeah, Diana's talking. So I think the people mental health, especially in recent years with this shift in population, which has seen more families, women, children, and adolescents, here in Mexico and the organizations that works from the border in Mexico and USA doesn't know a lot of how work with that population. Like a lot of these years, the people know how can work with men and adult people, but now the young people, we really don't have a lot of tools or strategies to support that. Like a lot of families and women come to the clinic that I work and just say the physical problems that has the adult people, but nobody sit down and ask to the children's how is the travel, or how how are you, with all that things. And it's really interesting because for the organizations here in Tijuana, I am the only psychologist to attend like kids from 0 to 18 years old free. I'm the only person that attend that. A lot of organizations, like universal organizations, work with children, but to 11th, 13th to more old, not too young. So it's really interesting to see that and the demand of the people here on the border. I worked in the past in Guadalajara, that is more on the center of Mexico, and the people really don't ask about the mental health service a lot because the people want to go to the north, to the border, and cross. But when the people come to Tijuana and need to wait a lot of time or just wait to see what happened with the cases, individual cases for the families, the people need psychologists, and just not as just a psychologist, like all that service for mental health, like psychiatrics, something like, for example, with Michelle, with herbalist, to something that can help for the mental health service. It's super interesting because, for example, for the Haitian people, needs maybe some natural service to can calm the stress or the anxiety or the depression or something like that, and it's help for the people, but you need to have more tools, just not a psychologist for that situation, So it's really interesting to my way to see the mental health from the people, and it's from my experience, it's not the people from to migrants, and it's from the people who work for the migrant people, like all of you and me needs a mental health service because it's a lot. Something that I think has helped in Tijuana is being able to unite and communicate it among organizations with their strengths, needs, and actions, so we can strengthen ourselves in the fight. Also, uniting and as organizations to file complaints and demands with the Mexican government and society are so important. Issues of violence helps strengthen our voice. Being able to be like migrants, having organization and activists who flow with the need and don't force necessity into the actions you take, because otherwise you don't be attentive to reality of the migrant situation, which change daily. I feel that, like everyone else in the world, there are things that we always need to improve and take care of. I believe that our borders are not stronger than our humanity. Migration should not be a problem to be solved, but a story to be heard, a life to be accompanied, and a dignity to be defended. Thank you.
Thank you, Deanna. That was beautiful. To comment on the part she brought up, so I had the privilege of meeting Deanna and her colleagues at a clinic called Refugee Health Alliance in Tijuana a couple of years ago. And so, as she was mentioning, I was able to bring down a bunch of herbs that were donated by different small companies in the US or individuals who harvest herbal medicine. And we found, I guess for the last 15 years, I found that in migrant communities that I work with here in Oakland, for a lot of people on the topic of mental health, at our clinic, we had a medical doctor, a therapist, and then myself doing nutrition and herbal medicine. And so working a lot with trauma, working a lot with anxiety, insomnia, stress, depression. And so having the opportunity to take some of that medicine, which in many ways is indigenous to the communities that we're serving, um, across the border and collaborate with comrades in Mexico was great. And we were able to, Deanna and I worked together at the migrant shelters, and just even in a minimal way, being able to help people to decrease anxiety, decrease depression, and in pretty much ubiquitously to sleep better, um, because the journey, the trauma, everything takes a toll on your ability to sleep and to rest, and that in turn makes everything more challenging. So, we were able, through the help of places like Herbalists Without Borders, to get a bunch of essential oils, as well as donations from Five Flavors Herbs and other places to have tinctures that I prepared for sleep and stress that we brought down. And we found that in particular, the essential oils were really helpful to people because it was something that they didn't have to take internally if they had any discomfort using teas or other remedies. And it was something that felt familiar to a lot of people and just took the edge off. Obviously, it doesn't resolve the larger structural issues in any way, but in a certain sense, if there is a way to provide any kind of lessening of the stress and pain, it makes people that much stronger for dealing with what they're up against. Yeah. So I'm gonna turn it over to Europe, actually, because we are realizing how late it is right now over there for you guys. Thank you so much for pounding the coffee and hanging in there with us. So we'll switch gears to some of the things that you all have found effective and inspiring in fighting back against the repression. And then maybe we'll shift back to Mexico and the US briefly, just to add a few more thoughts about solidarity over here.
It's really cool to hear all these inspiring things and examples of self-organization. I believe that difficult times create strong connection between people because when we are alone, we are easy target. What was especially inspiring for me in the struggle in Poland was that like I mentioned before, we managed to create quite good working network in really short time. Of course, solidarity movement exists in Poland before, but comparing to the scale of what's happened in 2021, it was really small. There is one fact also that can be really optimistic nowadays, that the anarchist and grassroots strategies and organization are spreading, even within people that never call themselves an anarchist or leftist. And especially in post-Soviet Europe, to be called leftist is like big offense. So back to the thing that I want to say, like we could see during the lockdown in 2020 when the COVID starts, when the movement took an important part to support people. When the state made a lot of prohibitions but failed totally with helping citizens. So many initiatives was created in totally grassroots model, and a lot of them was started by anarchists and people joined massively. In the squad where I was living, for example, we even create a little factory and we sewed masks because state couldn't even provide this. And again, a year later, when the black protest against anti-abortion law became a huge demonstration, like in all cities in Poland, police often used violence, so knowledge of anarchist Black Cross and other grassroots organizations was priceless for demonstrators. And again, like 1 year later, when thousands of people on move needed help in border forest, it was no borders tactics that worked best. Like all these big NGOs didn't knew how to handle things because state delegalized almost all kinds of helping. Also, the narration that they have using now, they took totally from No Borders movement. It was one funny but significant scene on the beginning of this when one politician came to the border and all media, of course, gathered around him. But he didn't know what to say because he didn't know nothing about migration, causes of things that was happening, and what soldiers are doing. So he was trying to ask all the time anarchists what he should say. It sounds a bit ridiculous, but how I see it, in this way we can distribute our ideas really wide. Yeah, what we could hear since forever is that our ideas and strategies are utopian and have no chance to work. But more and more years, we can observe that these tactics and way of organizing works better than classical hierarchic model. In this way, we could also make some ties with local community of the border area. This region is called Podlasie, and it was always considered as one of the most conservative ones, but in the same time is one of the most multicultural. It is the only place where Catholics, Orthodox, and Muslims live since hundreds of years in Poland. So, for sure, conservative, but also sensitive and aware of for injustice and human harm. They don't calculate if it's forbidden or not. If someone needs help, they will do it. And because we are in a large part working class people, not like big NGO workers that despite Polish rednecks, we could talk with them normally. And of course, like active locals is like minority, because like always most people prefer not to see and do anything. But still, I felt that the trust to police, for example, is not so big like in other parts of Poland. And of course, we are facing really difficult, dark times now. We have a war behind our east border in Ukraine, and solidarity is called often a treason by right-wing politicians. And like right-wing politicians get more and more attention because they know how to play with people's fear. So for them, all activists on the border are Putin agents. So, I mean, as a No Borders team, we were organizing also humanitarian convoys together with Operation Solidarity and ABC Galicia to Ukraine with humanitarian help. So we could really see that for the same work that we were doing in Ukraine, we were called like heroes. And what we're doing in Belarusian border, we were called traitors. So that's how the fascist logic works. But yeah, we don't care.
Marie speaking. Yeah, I think exchanges like this are really, really important. I think within the No Border movement in Europe and probably also in many other places, I think we've really learned also how important it is to connect the different struggles and to learn from each other. And I mean, for example, I've had the privilege to be on ships together with, for example, people from the US, we're doing search and rescue in the desert between Mexico and the US. And I learned a lot from them. Or, for example, from the Anarchist Yacht Club, people from the US coming over and supporting in search and rescue. So these kind of like moments are really inspiring, and but also we have like different layers of solidarity, and it's incredibly important that we like work together. And for example, Daniel mentioned an alarm phone structure in Poland, and there are several of these structures that have been implemented. For example, the first one I think was actually for the Centromat, and it's an activist network of people who provide a number that can be called by people in distress, and who then try to pressure authorities and the public to launch rescue missions, which has been absolutely really like an amazing tool and really effective, and has really developed into like an amazing tool of also documentation and really effective solidarity. And another thing I think that worked quite well within like the search and rescue movement or structure has been just staying flexible, because the state comes up with new repression and the governments change laws, and we live in pretty fucking daunting time, like with fascism on the rise, and it's not easy to keep up the spirit. But if we keep flexible, for example, at times we work with bigger ships that we're able to withstand longer standoffs, and we're able to stay out in the area of operation for longer. And currently, because they are a lot of times blocked by governments, right now, really small ships, like even sailing ships, have proven to be some of the most effective assets. So just being able to adapt to what is happening. And I think another aspect is also what we need to remember is that we have to be kind to each other and also to ourselves. I think burnout and what Diana mentioned, burnout and also this like high level of stress is taking a toll on individuals and the movement. So yeah, self-care and mutual aid, I think, is a revolutionary act that we need to continue and make it in the long run.
This is Anna speaking. For us, the networking is a very important way of taking action against repression. It is only through exchange with those affected and activists that the systematic patterns become visible at all. This allowed us to see that the criminalization of migrants is taking place in a similar way throughout Europe. And in these networks, resources can be shared and, for example, donations generated, and joint strategies can be developed and experiences can be shared. Just to give an example, on the legal level, in the beginning there were hardly any successes at the legal level, but today there are regular acquittals for people who've been charged with smuggling. And that exchange and cooperation have led to the system no longer being untouchable. And that's very important, I think. And also personal victories such as acquittals are crucial as they give hope and resilience to those affected. We supported Homayun Sabetara throughout his traumatizing time in prison and gave him hope to keep going until the next trial and to still believe in an acquittal. We have heard from a great many people that this has motivated them and that they now also want to show more resistance for their relatives and that they no longer accept the sentences. So to sum up, I would say that effective solidarity combines the direct action, resistance on a legal level, public awareness, and direct support of affected people, so we can combat systemic injustice. All of these things, I think, strengthen the No Borders movement and motivate more people to take action.
I feel inspired just by hearing you all talk. And I think, as you all mentioned, centralizing the role and voices of people who are directly impacted seems like, one of the most crucial things. I think we're really grateful to have Vivian here, to talk about the work that she's been doing. And I see similar work happening in the United States in terms of, particularly among the Latinx community, really organizing to prevent a lot of what ICE is trying to do. I'm going to talk for just a second about some of the specific ways that's been happening. There's been a lot of work around know your rights and making sure that people who may be approached for deportation by ICE and during ICE raids are very aware that they do have rights and that regardless of your status in this country, you currently still have rights to not talk to, not engage with ICE. And so doing workshops that are led either by lawyers, but also peer-to-peer workshops. We've at the school that I work at, we've been organizing those and also as individual teachers kind of working directly with our students. But I think even more importantly is the role that community members have taken in going door to door, handing out leaflets. We have what's called red cards, which are small pocket-sized documents that have your rights laid out clearly, generally on one side in English, then with an explanation in people's first language on the other side so that they can tangibly hand those cards to immigration officials or put them up in their window during a raid to make it very clear that they don't intend to cooperate, they don't intend to speak. And at that point, without having a specific warrant, the ICE officials have no legal jurisdiction to enter people's homes. That doesn't mean that they always, follow those rules, but at least having a leg to stand on and say, fuck off, we're not participating in this is extremely important. For instance, in Chicago, there was a really important, Latinx and immigrant community led move to make that education ubiquitous so that nobody was working with or collaborating with ICE. And it was so successful that the Department of Homeland Security actually said, we're having trouble doing our job in Chicago because there is so much community resistance to collaborating with ICE in any way. So I think, that is certainly a model that can be followed and needs to be followed and is being followed by other cities. It's something we're focusing on here in the Bay Area as well. We also have, in collaboration with sort of the Know Your Rights, is rapid response networks where people can call in when they see any ICE activity, where people can inform each other, where, the folks who are taking the calls on the rapid response hotlines can put people in touch with legal representation and potentially even get, folks out to accompany people who are feeling insecure or unsafe. So these working in collaboration have created somewhat of a pushback, though again, there is certainly a sea of repression there. But I think that type of effort has been inspiring amongst anarchists and other more autonomous folk. There have been a lot of sort of wheat pasting of Know Your Rights information and other information around cities, just making some visibility about the fact that there is not tolerance for that behavior. Other things that have been happening are mutual aid and resource redistribution to help cover people's bail expenses, to help cover daily needs. I think we're also sort of trying to do more of that and sort of catch up on how to create the trust, because a lot of people feel so unsafe right now that it's sometimes difficult or there's stigma in asking for help. And so, really building relationships, and again, just the importance of that work coming from impacted communities themselves as the leaders in it, so that that trust is there and so that there is a sense of empowerment, because it's certainly about solidarity and not charity in any way. Court accompaniment is another thing that can happen, since we are seeing these disappearances where people show up for what should just be a standard procedural hearing and end up getting deported. So having some kind of record, some kind of videotaping on phones when these things are happening, when people are afraid to leave their homes, that supporters can go grocery shopping or perform other daily tasks, help do childcare or pet care in case of emergencies, just day-to-day tasks that become more difficult in the face of the escalating repression. We will link to something in the notes that was published by Crime Think that sort of provides a nice synthesis of a lot of different areas that people maybe who are based in the US can look into providing solidarity if they're able to. Also want to recognize NorCal Resist up in Sacramento and La Resistencia in Seattle, who has been organizing to shut down the Northwest Detention Center. And their protests can often give a sense of solidarity to those who are imprisoned, even if the center remains open, because people inside the detention centers can hear people on the outside. NorCal Resist in Sacramento has been doing a lot of different angles of support. Again, a lot of these groups may not always have exactly the same values or approaches, but oftentimes they have more resources and potentially more capacity. and at times a longer standing relationship with the community. So, as was mentioned by our comrades in Europe, it's important to find ways that we can overlap and work together when that's possible to make the resistance stronger. Another thing is simply storytelling and media making as a tool for people to be able to amplify their experiences from their own words, from their own perspectives, as we are seeing, demonization in certain media outlets that fail to tell the human story behind what people are experiencing. I'm going to pass it back to Andrea because we'd love to hear a little more about Enclave Caracol as an amazing autonomous space that's been around for years in Tijuana, doing a lot of really important work. And in fact, when some of the clinics down there, when Refugee Health Alliance, El Otro Lado, who does really important legal work, both of those that are now NGOs originally started out of Enclave Caracol when they were more DIY exercises. I've seen your herbal medicine room there, and it's very impressive.
Thank you. This is Andrea speaking. And adding to the conversation on effective solidarity strategies, on this side of the border, we have Enclave Caracol, located a few blocks away from the physical border wall. Here, individuals come together to create a safer meeting point in the city. Here, all kinds of folk can come together and be themselves. Many of them migrants who have just arrived at the city, others who just happened to be deported a few days ago, but most of us looking to reconnect with the city and survive in this chaotic environment. In that way, the building provides food, connectivity, and a physical place for distant dialogue to happen. Enclave has become a hub for resources needed by the local community in relation to education, recreation, and community organization, and many, many other amazing things actually that the state will not provide. And we have been able to do so by creating alliances with many organizations or NGOs and individuals who are active in the community in the area to distribute and the tools and the goods for free and sometimes for low accessible cost. This space is here for that, to be used actively in the resistance, whether for resting, connecting to the internet, or even partying, whatever the community is needing. This space is always changing and open to be used and is available for that through horizontal organization. Thanks to being an autonomous space, we are able to address the specific needs pointed out by the individuals in the city, such as linking people with specific health services, as abortions, gender affirming therapy, access to AIDS medication, and other stuff, all the way to providing a place for gathering for the LGBTQI plus individuals without any real limitations on what we can coordinate with or for other than our own abilities, resources, and collective values. Um, that thanks to community organization. Unlike many other NGOs or active organizations here in the area, whose own funding limits their margin of actions and are mostly based on bureaucracy. Like many other self-organized and maintained spaces, here in Clave, the struggle is always constant. Lack of hands, lack of funds, lack of energies. But we're always motivating people to come to Enclave and see how is it that you can add to the work and the coordination and organization being done here. As always, the space is open to change and to make the change that we want to see in the world happen. Like Michelle mentioned, the space has host um, legal clinics, spaces for medical services, spaces for individual therapies. It has provided spaces for um, uh, information specifically needed for the LGBT community here in Tijuana, information on how or what to do in case of being detained by the police. We provide foods with Comida No Bombas every Monday and Wednesdays. And we provide a space for the community with such as dance classes, theater classes. We have a space, an open cafe for an accessible price for the people who come by who are not able to afford coffee and any other of the shops in the area. We provide an accessible cafe. We also we have it's a three, just to make a bit clearer the story. It's a 4-story building that we have here in Tijuana Zona Norte, which is a hot, as in violence and crime area. And we look forward to create this space where people can, from all backgrounds, all forms, can come and be them happiest and fullest selves here, and where we can actually push forward to the outside world change that needs to be the change that we need. So Enclave can be all that and everything. It's an open to whatever the community needs. We just ask folk to come in and be part of this. And yes, come to Enclave Caracol.
Thank you, Andrea. I have to say that having had the opportunity to spend a little time down there, I was very inspired by Enclave. I can't remember if you mentioned this, but the bikes, they have a whole bike library that gets bikes fixed, gets like given out to the community. And I think for me, just this sort of melding of the work of autonomous people, anarchist people, and all of the migrant and deported communities. That is something we should maybe distinguish. So there is sort of a multi-directional flow of people coming through Tijuana. So there's the people who would be arriving at the border with the intention of trying to cross into the US, but then there's also community that has been deported from the US who's living in Tijuana. That's more from before, because I guess something we didn't really go into was that between these discussions and also having the opportunity in California to fairly easily get down to Tijuana, we were looking at trying to solidify a little more of our communication to provide resources and support if a lot of people were now going to be deported to Tijuana. But really what's happening is that you guys haven't seen an increase in numbers because deportations have been, as we said earlier, to prisons in El Salvador, to Guantanamo, but also for people who are Mexican who are being sent back to Mexico, they're being taken to either Tabasco or Tapachula for the most part, I think is what we're hearing. And both of those places are more dangerous with less resources and much harder to get transportation out of. And so this seems like sort of part of the whole regime of just making people's lives more difficult and more painful, the whole process. And so, for us, I think it's revisiting how do we establish more connections in places where people are physically, arriving at this point. But back to the more inspiring. One thing about Enclave Caracol, I don't know if you folks in Europe remember, but many, many years ago, I had the opportunity to visit Ekeja, which was a squat in Vienna, which had a really cool model where they, on the first floor, was an anarchist library, an anarchist kitchen, a concert and activity space. But on the floors above, there was housing for migrants who had no place to stay and who needed, safe and protected housing. And so that was probably, I don't know, like in 2001 or 2002. And for me, that was really kind of inspiring because we don't have as many spaces like that in the US. And I think when I had the opportunity to go to Enclave, I sort of had that same feeling, particularly as we have a devastating problem of people who are unhoused and we're in a huge housing crisis. So trying to look at what creative ways, all of these things can be addressed.
If there's listeners who are interested in learning about squatting as a measure to create space for people on the move, there's also quite a bit of knowledge to be found in Europe. For example, in Greece, there's been great projects in the Netherlands, in Austria, lots of different countries. So I think there's also programs of sharing that knowledge, how squatting can be done quite efficiently.
And that's so much a part of where the idea, I think, between Daniel and I for this conversation came from, is that there's just different tendencies and approaches and tactics and strategies that have happened in different places. I think traditionally in the US, we haven't had as much success in that realm, though certainly some, but we can learn from each other. And I think now is the time when we have to be globalizing even more these conversations. So it is now incredibly late in Europe, a little less late in the US, but we've in Mexico, but we've been here for a while. So thank you so much to everybody for this conversation. For anybody who's listening, we'll put links in the show notes, including to Enclave Caracol, who would be more than happy, I think, to accept donations if anybody happens to want to contribute in that direction, as well as to No Borders Poland and other efforts that are happening, because I think a lot of the things we support are autonomous, but as such, can really use resources. So hopefully today also gave you some ideas to start some of your own initiatives. And we really hope that this relationship between the 8 of us and will continue, as well as grow into more connections between people trying to do similar work and fight back against borders and repression against human beings around the world.
Thanks again for joining us. It wasn't easy as we are in different time zones, so yeah, we really appreciate it. Like Michelle said, oppression became global, so our struggle also needs to be global. And I think like learning from our strategies and problems that we are facing is crucial to understand the world. And especially it's significant now when changes appear so fast. I have in my mind that we just start this discussion and we needed this to get know each other better and to learn more about us. In a way, we can start to think about more specific podcasts or publication in the future. And me personally, I was a bit confused following really contradicts news from Americas. So I really appreciate that I can now hear from people that are directly involved there in solidarity movement with people on move. And in the same way, I hope that we also put some more light for people from out of Europe about what is happening here. So let it be a good start for the future. And last but not least, I would like to thank to our listeners. If you managed to stay with us till now, that's amazing. Thanks.
And thank you so much to Elia and the rest of the crew at the Fire These Times for helping us distribute this. And I encourage everybody to check out the rest of the amazing podcasts on the Fire These Times and all of the other ones offered by From the Periphery, as there's really essential information that we can learn from each other. So wishing everybody all the best in these really intense times.